Hi everyone, this is Byron Jacobs from D&B Poker, and today I'm making another in our little series of author interviews. And I'm delighted to be joined by our leading author, without question, Jonathan Little. So, Jonathan, how are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you on. We've had you on quite a few times now because you do churn out books pretty regularly, so we have to get you on to discuss them. And the latest one I have here, this is, why is it not coming up? Oh, it's
Here,
got,
I have it.
oh
There it
God,
is.
if you hold it up, yeah, because I got the background thing on and the background thing kills that. But there it is, The Complete Poker Workout by Jonathan Little. And this is a quiz book. John's testing you with 100 hands, about 400 questions, a table, a poker table for every single question so that you can have a look, analyze the situation, see what you want to do, and see if your thoughts agree with John's. What would you like to say about the book, John? Did you enjoy writing it? You think it's going to be instructive? Well, obviously, you do think it's going to be instructive, but tell us what your thoughts are on the book.
I mean, I enjoyed writing the book a lot because it essentially forced me to go through and review my poker hands, which I do every day after I play poker. And I have a gigantic list of interesting hands or tricky spots that I'll share with my students or on pokercoaching.com. And I took a lot of the best hands from those, or the most interesting hands, or even hands that, are just common spots that I think a lot of people may mess up. And we go through them decision by decision. And that makes it a very good interactive learning book. I know a lot of people nowadays just sit back and watch Twitch videos or something, or watch YouTube videos and fall asleep at night, and they think they're learning poker, but that's not exactly learning poker. That's hanging out and enjoying poker and maybe picking up a little something. But if you really want to get good, you need to be in there actively learning and either discussing concepts with people or taking quizzes or getting real-time feedback. And that is exactly what this book does.
Okay, now you've been writing books for us for a long time now. I've lost track. It must be 15 years or something. So when you started out giving out your information and structuring your thoughts and your how you play poker and what you think works and doesn't work, how much has that changed in as over the arc of time that you've been kind of writing for us? And this must be like the obviously the most up-to-date perception of how you view the game should be played. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, I mean, a long time ago when I first started writing books for all of you, there were no educational tools, really. It was sort of guess what is right at poker and then do it. Or do simple math with how much does this hand have against this range in terms of equity and trying to figure out various simple math problems. But now we have good GTO tools like Peak GTO and a bunch of other GTO tools out there. And that helps you learn how to play well against both players who play perfectly, but also against players who play very, very poorly. If you know, for example, someone continuation bets the flop 100% of the time, these GTO tools will tell you that your strategy should be very, very different compared to if they continuation bet adequately or at the right frequency. So as you get better and better tools, you develop better and better strategies. And really, a lot of the way I go about studying the game now is simply testing myself against GTO strategies, but also against adjusted strategies that presume the opponent does something wrong. And that's essentially what this book is putting you in these spots in real world situations that either I or my students played. And we discuss the plays and why they should be made and why they perhaps should not be made.
Sure. Um, sorry, I've lost my train of thought. Yeah, the one thing that struck me about this book was that there's all these different situations, and the many things that you say come up quite frequently, and there's sort of common spots, and there's things that are a little bit less common. What would you say? Is there some area that you've noticed with your students where players in, I don't know, the kind of low to mid stakes games, which I assume many of your, if not most of your students are kind of like consistently kind of making mistakes in. I know there's other areas where maybe they like continuation betting, maybe they're getting it right like virtually always, but are there slightly more difficult spots where they're not on the ball as much?
Yeah, I think a very common spot that comes up is when they're out of position as the pre-flop raiser. So say you raise from earlier middle position, then somebody on the button calls, and that's it. You go to the flop heads up. This is a spot where a lot of people continuation bet usually way too often. They think I was a pre-flop raiser. I have a strong range. My opponent didn't re-raise me, so they probably don't have aces, kings, queens, or ace king. And all that is true. but you should still do a whole lot of checking simply because you're out of position and your range advantage is not nearly as big compared to if you were against, let's say, the player in the big blind, where they're going to be defending with all sorts of junk. So being out of position with only a small range advantage or no range advantage, you are forced to do a lot of checking if your opponent will play well. And I think as people have gotten better study tools and they can put themselves in real world spots against good opponents over and over, they've learned just don't fold to continuation bets when you're in position all that often. And it's not that hard of a strategy to do as long as you realize that concept. I mean, back in the day, people would fold if they didn't have a pair or a draw. But now, if they have an overcard with a backdoor flush draw, they're sticking around as they quite often should against a small bet in position. And again, as your opponents are going to play better, you have to develop better strategies, and that demands you do a lot of checking from out of position. Now, that concept is broadly true, but also people don't realize how much more often you should be betting when you're against particular calling positions. For example, if you raise under the gun, first position, and the player on the button calls, when there are a lot of players in between you and the button, meaning, a bunch of people folded, that essentially implies you have the strongest range advantage you will have. And in that spot, you should usually continuation bet more often compared to if you raise from, let's say, the cutoff and the button calls. Because on the cutoff, your range is much wider than it is when it's under the gun. And that's going to result in the range advantage being much closer. So when you're under the gun against the button, you still continuation bet a decent chunk of the time. Not all the time, but a decent amount. But when you raise the cutoff and the button calls, you have to do a ton of checking. And a lot of people just don't do that and they're not even aware of that concept. So that's something that comes up quite a lot even today.
Okay. And the other thing I think that people might be thinking, I imagine you've got, there's like a lot of people out there who really like your stuff. We've sold a lot of your books, and there must be a lot of people out there who really like your stuff. And over the years, they'll have bought, a number of your books, and they're going to see this book advertised. We're probably going to email them, they'll come across it, and they might be thinking to themselves, well, I like John Little, I really like his stuff, but I've kind of already got 4 or 5 of his books. What am I going to get from this one that I'm not getting from? So I'm playing devil's advocate a little bit here. What if people are thinking, yeah, John's great, but I got a load of his stuff. Why do I really need this book? What would you say to them?
This book is like you going and sitting and playing a poker session to some extent, where instead of getting to play 6 or 8 interesting hands throughout the day, you're going to get to play an interesting hand every time you flip the page. And it is as if you are going to play without having your money at risk while having me sitting over your shoulder giving you feedback on every decision point, which is different than the other books that are more a guide on how to play every spot in a very logical, laid out manner. This book is designed to discuss all sorts of concepts in almost like a random way because that's how it's actually presented in the real world. We organized the book from deep stack down to lowest stack.
Yeah.
So we started with 300 big blind deep hands or so, and then by the end we're playing 10 or 15 big blind deep hands, and most of the hands are somewhere in the middle, 40 to 80 big blinds or something like that. But the concepts are presented kind of randomly, sort of like they are in the real world. So this is more like actually going and sitting and playing a poker session with a coach right there with you.
So you could view this almost as, okay, you've got my other books. Now do this book and we'll see if you've been paying attention to all the other books and what I've been saying in there. So this kind of, yeah, so that would all make sense. And how would you advise players? So I mean, you've talked quite a bit already in about all these tools that are available now, and I imagine some players maybe are more comfortable with books and reading stuff in books, and they kind of maybe a bit kind of overwhelmed by the thought of these. I mean, something like PioSolver is obviously very, very complicated the first time you're presented with it. It's immensely powerful, but it's quite bewildering at first. I mean, do you think that people do have to sort of integrate the two styles of learning in order to be able to maximize their abilities to be able to improve, or do you think they can just focus on books, or is it? What do you think about that?
It really depends on how much time and effort you want to put into studying poker. There are only so many good books out there. There aren't infinite, right? There are a lot of training videos, but I do think that at the end of the day, getting in there and actually practicing or digging deep into what good strategy looks like and figuring out where is the perfect strategy playing differently than me in particular is very, very valuable. Because, for example, maybe you always find logical bluffs with your draws, but you're missing your bluffs with, I don't know, an overcard and a backdoor flush draw or something. And you would not know that because unless you actually looked at the strategy and saw it. And sure, like you could have that presented in a book or in a video, but consistently going through and training yourself against a perfect playing robot or somebody who's even messing up, whatever it is, seeing that you're making errors in that situation over and over and over again will reiterate the fact that you're making an error here. And if you're making consistent errors, you're obviously not going to do very well. And look, in all games and sports and all of that, people get better over time because technology improves over time and because education improves over time and strategies improve over time. And if you are playing with a strategy from 2003, well, it's probably not going to work out in 2026. So you need to make sure that you are doing your best within reason to stay up to date. But I realize a lot of people, they want to study poker 1 hour a week. And if you have an hour a week, then sure, this book will be great because you just simply don't have that much time to go through it. But as you want to get very, very good at something, you have to study a lot. And I think playing and practicing against GTO strategies or learning those strategies is very valuable.
What would you,
And look, to be fair, in this book, a lot of it is just that. A lot of this book is you playing against a presumably strong opponent because you're playing in a middle or high stakes tournament and you don't know what your opponent does wrong. And when you don't know what your opponent does wrong, then you should fall back on a GTO strategy. So even if you are, call it afraid of solvers or not comfortable with solvers, you're kind of doing it right here in this book. You just don't know it. That said, I would definitely recommend everyone get comfortable with it. I have a website, Peak GTO, which is a GTO solver program. You can go there. It'll present 25 hands to you, right? Whenever you sign up, kind of like this book. It'll ask you to play through the hands. Then after that, it'll direct you to some drills that will help you fix whatever your most large leaks are that you've demonstrated over those 25 hands. That's a good way to get easy, quick wins and get used to using the program.
would you say that the book is directed towards live play or online play, or does it not really matter at all because the strategies are going to be the same whatever you do? Is there any distinction that you'd be able to tease out there?
All of the hands from this book are from live poker. However, I do think the strategies are all essentially the same in all of them. There are various additional pieces of information you can get either live or online. And typically the players play a little bit worse live compared to online at the same stakes. But at the end of the day, poker is poker, and you are trying to figure out what the right play is in this spot. And I do realize that nowadays a lot of like deep stack live cash games have various structures where they have um, like they have the deuce to seven game, where they have the stand up game, or whatever you want to call it. They have all these weird dynamics, and sure, that changes the thing a bit. That changes the spot a bit. But look, if you're playing no limit hold'em tournaments online or live, this book is definitely very applicable because those structures are essentially the same.
Okay, that's great. So I'll just reiterate once again. Could you hold it up, Jonathan? Because it doesn't work when I do it. This is Jonathan Little talking about his latest book, The Complete Poker Workout. It's obviously 100 hands to test yourself. There's about 400 questions in there. That would keep you going for Jonathan's suggesting some people study like an hour a week. That will keep you going for a year or so easily, I'd have thought. So that'd be very good value. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Jonathan, to about the book other than the stuff that we've just discussed?
I've enjoyed the book, making the book a lot. I've already a bunch of students have already told me they love it. They love the interactive nature of it. They love that they can sit and read it for 5 minutes or 5 hours because every hand is only a few pages long. And I think it's a great way to improve your skills.
Right, and obviously we've also got the EPUB version, and that's available from and that and the book are available from all the usual sources. And if you want to go to our website, dnbpoker.com, and pick it up there, we'd be delighted. That would be great. But wherever you get the book from, we would like to thank you for supporting us and buying our books, and hope you will continue to do so. And thank you very much, Jonathan, for joining us today, and wishing you luck in your future plans and playing, etc.
Thank you very much. Thanks for publishing the book, and let's keep going and doing it.
All right. Always a pleasure to work with you, Jonathan. Thanks.
Thank you.